In this lesson, we are going to learn about the preamble to the Constitution. So just like the Declaration of Independence had a preamble, so does the Constitution. The learning targets are: I can define what a preamble is, I can distinguish between the preamble of the Declaration of Independence and the preamble of the U.S. Constitution. I can interpret the meaning of the 6 goals of the U.S. government found in the preamble of the Constitution, and I can identify examples of how the goals of the U.S. government, as expressed in the preamble, are actually applied. So you're going to see how those things written back in 1787 are things that how our government actually still does things today. Just a little bit of a recap of the history. So we have the colonies going from being ruled by a constitutional monarchy. So they're being ruled by King George, and they decide that they don't want to be ruled by someone that's not fair, that is not listening to them, not giving them representation, and so they decide to declare independence. Now, we know that just because you say you're going to be independent, the king isn't just going to let them go, so they had to fight that war. Now, the colonies, which are now the states, realized that and see themselves as being independent, knew that they had to have some rules to go by. Just like the pilgrims on the Mayflower, when they sailed over, they knew that before they got off the ship that they had to have some rules that they agreed to, writing the Mayflower Compact. So the founding fathers, the very first rules of government that was set up after they declared independence was called the Articles of Confederation. And so during the American Revolution, the states or colonies actually lived under these rules. After the American Revolution was over, there were things that the Articles of Confederation that weren't working very well. They didn't have the power to tax, there was no central government, and then the final straw was Shays' Rebellion. And so the founding fathers realized that the Articles of Confederation were not working. And so they called for that meeting, the meeting of representatives, where they were going to meet in Philadelphia and try to fix the Articles of Confederation. This is the meeting that becomes known as the Constitutional Convention. And they end up meeting at Liberty Hall in Philadelphia, and that's the building that you can still go see today. You can go inside of it, the same exact place. You can see where they wrote the Declaration, and you can see where they wrote the Constitution. So once they sat down and started looking at the Articles of Confederation, they realized that it really wasn't going to work to fix them. They decided to scrap them and write all new rules for our government. And so throughout the summer, they ended up working long hours and discussing and debating, and then they finally came out with the Constitution of the United States of America. Just a little recap on the Constitutional Convention. There were 55 men or delegates from the new states. Some trivia stuff. Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, although they are founding fathers, they were not at this meeting. Thomas Jefferson was also a foreign dignitary, and he was actually in Europe. George Washington was chosen to lead the meeting. Again, this is an Independence Hall. The meeting went from May 1787 through September 1787. The reason they were meeting is to fix or revise the Articles of Confederation, and what ended up happening is getting rid of the Articles and writing the entire new form of government. So although it was written and agreed upon by those men in 1787, in order for it to go into effect, the new states had to ratify or approve it. And so that didn't happen until 1789. And so George Washington actually starts being the president of the United States in 1789. He's our first one. This is Independence Hall. This is the building that you can still go into if you were to visit Philadelphia. And it's part of the National Park Service. So if you go in there, you'll actually get a little history lesson from a park ranger. And then you get to go in and see where they actually wrote the documents. So right in these windows. These were the windows that they didn't open when it was so hot. Across the street from this building is where they house the Liberty Bell. The Liberty Bell, the little story behind it is because it has a crack in it. This crack, they tried to fix it with different companies tried to recast this bell, and in Miss Lamar's children's on their dad's side, great granddad Pass's family line actually he was a descendant of the company that tried to recast it. So if you were to see the bell up and close, the company that tried to recast it was called Pass and Stowe, and their great 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 grandfather was great granddad Pass. And then this is the room in which the men had worked to um, revise the articles and then write the Constitution. So just to recap, because we're just looking at the first part of the Constitution. So these delegates at the Constitutional Convention created the U.S. Constitution. So the first part is the preamble. The preamble is an introductory statement, just like the Declaration of Independence had the introductory statement. And so this introduces what the document is all about. It's going to outline the 6 purposes or goals of the rest of the document. Just to compare the two, so to keep the ideas that we can't just say the preamble, it has to be the preamble to the Declaration or the preamble to the Constitution. So the Declaration starts with "We hold these truths." The Constitution is "We, the people of the United States." Now, because the U.S. Constitution was written over 200 years ago, many of the words are not familiar to us, or they're not words that we use today or don't use that frequently. So your first job is going to be to interpret the meaning of these 6 goals listed in the preamble. To do so, these unfamiliar words need to be replaced by some synonyms, and I'm going to do that for you. So this is going to help to have it make sense. So here's some of the unfamiliar terms. You have the word union, which means combining. So the states are going to be uniting or combining. Justice, which means to judge, having fairness and equity. To ensure means to make certain, make sure it's going to happen. Domestic means at home. Domestic means at home. So in a broader sense, it means either in your state or in the country. So if we're trying to provide domestic tranquility, we're trying to make sure things at home or in the United States of America are peaceful and calm. So tranquility is peace and calm. Common means universal or general. Like sometimes people might say common sense, and it's like a general understanding of something or more well known. To defend something or defense is protecting them. When you see the word welfare, it means taking care of people's health and safety or their well-being. Liberty, freedom, and independence. The word posterity means like future or future generations or your children. And then the word ordain means we establish this or we're going to make this be true or order it to be. So breaking it down, so on the left-hand side is the preamble to the Constitution, and on the left-hand side is the preamble. On the right-hand side is kind of an explanation of what those 6 parts of the preamble mean. So to form a more perfect union, we're creating a way for the states to get along. We want them to be able to trade more easily and not fight about things. To establish justice, creating that system of fairness, working towards equality. You don't want to have something like they did under King John back in 1215. We want to ensure domestic tranquility, peacefulness at home. We want to provide for the common defense by having a military and weapons to protect us from other countries or from invasion. We want to promote the general welfare, so making sure that people that need help or need assistance in their time of need get that help. And then finally, to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. So we want to make sure that we have all these freedoms right now while we're living and that they are protected for our future generations. The last thing that you need to do, and this is kind of that application part or thinking it through, is that although the document was written back in 1787, things that are still being done today in recent history fall under these 6 goals. So everything that's written in the Constitution falls under these 6 goals. So if we're trying to form a more perfect union, an example of that is if Congress passes a law that no state can stop a citizen from freely traveling from one state to another. We can easily go get some Wisconsin cheese curds if that's what we want to do. Number 2, the second example, an example of these goals is to establish justice. An example, and this happened many years ago now, but Congress passed a law known as Title IX, and in this, trying to establish fairness, this law states that public schools must provide athletic programs for both females and males. And so that idea that you have to have, you can't just focus on one sex or the other. The third, to ensure domestic tranquility. An example of that is the police end up catching and arresting 3 people suspected of a robbery at a bank. And there's a little typo here, but I'm not going to re-record. And it says, "and our posterity." That should have been deleted, so I'm sorry about that. So the police catch and arrest 3 people suspected of robbing a bank. That is making me feel safer at home, that I don't have to worry about these criminals running around. So domestic tranquility, I feel safe at home. Another one is to provide for the common defense. And so if the president asks Congress to provide more money to build additional military weapons like a stealth bomber, then we're trying to defend our nation. Another part of the preamble is to promote the general welfare. And so an example of this would be if the United States government had to give emergency money or aid to hurricane victims in Florida. Another example of promoting the general welfare is if we pass a law that provides funding for the building of specific housing for the elderly or disabled, and that would be to take care of our citizens when they need help. And then the last thing is to
We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America.